Here's a quick look into today's episode.
As a leader and as a teammate, one thing that I've started to really want to hang my hat on is to be the guy that picks up the phone whenever someone calls. There's a lot of different ways that you can describe or quantify leadership and being a teammate. True leadership and true servitude and being a teammate to your peers and to your subordinates, it comes at a cost. And a lot of times that cost is your effort or your time. It can be difficult to be willing to pay that cost every time. Something as simple as whenever someone calls, I'll pick up the phone no matter what. Learning to love being a staff officer. My S3 at the time, now Lieutenant Colonel Austin Commons, he's out in the 173rd. I think he's a battalion commander. He pulled me into his office and he was like, hey brother, look, I know you think that staff work isn't sexy, but this is where the morale of the battalion is built. Good staff work leads to soldiers being able to execute good training, morale increasing, and like the battalion operating more efficiently. And we need people in here that are passionate about that and excited to do the work. When I showed up to Hawaii, there was a phrase that was taught to me that I can look back and apply to all this, which was, then Colonel Van Antwerp. He was the DCGO and he did PT with me in my company one time. And he said a phrase that has stuck with me and kind of been a guiding principle in a lot of things that I do, which was think about what you want the soldiers to feel when they walk away from whatever event it is that you're planning or executing. You have the power in that moment to plan an event thorough enough and rehearsed enough to where they walk away thinking, man, what a great event that was. That was a highlight of my career. You can do that. And that happens all the time. We've all been through both ends of that spectrum, walking away feeling disappointed and walking away feeling exhilarated by a training event. That is the power that a motivated staff can have. I was the AS3, so I was up there in the front, and the shame, the burning shame that I felt, it just made me realize a couple things. And one is the power that kind of informal leadership has in a formation and your infectious attitude can have, and how careful you have to be as you wield it. Every word you say will be absorbed by the people who look up to you. And lesson 2 was a lesson of, man, I let down my battalion and brigade commander so hard. I mean, this was one of the most heartbreaking and like devastating moments of my career, just completely being disloyal to my commander, who I had a great relationship with. And I kind of swore that day, I'm not going to make a mistake like this again. I'm going to wield whatever informal leadership authority I have. I'm going to wield it carefully, and I'm going to be loyal to my commander. I learned a lot about teamwork on that staff. That's a competitive environment when you're a captain on brigade staff or a major on division staff. It can be easy to be really focused on your own success. Teamwork is infectious. It really just takes one person starting and breaking the mold for everyone to start to adopt a mentality of we're going to build each other up until that team is just completely cohesive and for each other. And the guy who actually started that for us on brigade staff is a guy named Adrian Rincon. I remember him serving us as our peer and not letting us fail no matter what it costed himself. Being a good teammate costs something. If it didn't cost something, everybody would be a great teammate, and it wouldn't be such a rare thing to see.
Welcome to another episode of Teach Me to Fish, where our purpose is to help leaders better understand what drives people. In today's world, the core of recruiting and retaining talent revolves around leadership. And not just average leadership, but motivated, values-based, inspirational leadership. Our purpose is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories and stacking habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people.
Hey, sir.
My man, how are
Good to
you?
see you.
Good to see you. You looking good, man. The house does not look like, I don't see any boxes behind you.
Yeah, I spread them all out flat on the floor. So
Yeah.
we're in a hotel still, though. So be in the hotel for a couple more weeks, and then just signed a lease, so we'll move into the house. I think like April 11th or so. So yeah, looking forward to being back in the house.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. It must be nice being there.
Yeah, we're in Monterey, sir, and this is our second time here. I was here before for language. Had an awesome community. Found a church family that we loved, found friends that we loved. So when it was time to pick a place for grad school, obviously it's tempting to want to go somewhere on the East Coast to like an Ivy League school or something like that. But having the opportunity to bring my wife back here and, we're expecting, to give birth here with like family and friends that we love, was an easy decision. So yeah, we love being out here. The beach is here, so it reminds us of Hawaii.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just a good place to be.
Oh man, that's awesome. Well, hey, thanks for doing this with me today because like, you know how much I love having these conversations and getting them from a lot of different people, a lot of different, vantage points, and your vantage point is an area that I want to spend a little bit more time on. But, people that are just got done being commanders, they're more in the middle of their career. They're not on the tail end. At the same time, they're not just getting started. You've got enough experience to have seen some things, but you also know that you got potentially a long roads in front of you, right? That are out there. You're not just given this sage advice from somebody that maybe has done it for all these years, but somebody who's still doing it, who's young and is still out there and doing it, and it's kind of fresh in your mind. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. I mean, guys have said it before. I listened to Trevor Goki's podcast kind of in preparation for this. He's a good friend of mine. We commanded together, but it is surreal being a fan of the podcast. Some of the legends that you've had on here, a lot of guys that I've worked with, and then now kind of being in the seat and having a chance to do the same. It's an honor, sir. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I hope you realize like I meant it when I said it's just a couple of Army dudes having a conversation about something
definitely.
that we love doing and sharing it with as many people. Someone said the other day, why are you doing it? And I said, could you imagine if I took a couple hundred people that have influenced my life and my career, just shared the conversations and the things that they taught me with as many people as I possibly could.
Yeah, exactly.
Before you jump right into it, I wanted to talk about what's kind of like the so what, the thing that I hope that we spend the most amount of our time talking about, not just through your story and how you came up in the Army, but like what you've witnessed as being a part of winning cultures and what you've witnessed as part of being part of winning teams, and what were those things that you latched onto and you made them part of your, the teams that you built, and what you learned the most. What does it mean to be a great teammate? What does it mean? Like, what were you looking in people, to be a great teammate? And that's kind of like the spoiler alert about what I had hoped to spend the most amount of our time talking about.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. And, you asked that question to me to reflect on a couple of days ago. And, I've been talking on the phone a lot with Don Caslow, who, popular guest on the show. He was my first sergeant when I was with Tiger Company. And, I think originally when I was going to come on here, I really wanted to focus on kind of the great team that we were able to build in Tiger Company and how that spread and stuff like that. And I think I would love to still talk about that. But, I've transitioned from infantry to foreign area officer in the last couple of years. And the truth is that transition has been really tough for me, kind of emotionally. And it kind of almost feels like a breakup because I love the infantry so much. And for a long time, it was the only thing I wanted to do. And I had aspirations for battalion command and everything. And so kind of so suddenly over halfway into my career, 12 years in, pivoting to something else, it's been really difficult for me to kind of digest. And so preparing for the podcast and reflecting on stories and stuff like that has kind of made me realize, I think a part of what makes me sad about leaving the infantry, obviously I love the mission, I love the people, but I think the people at the tail end of my career remember me as Tiger 6 or Eagle 6 and kind of the things that team was able to do. But man, it was a long journey of a lot of mistakes, people who showed me grace, allowed me to learn lessons, mature, which is a word that we throw around a lot as leaders. And I think what was really making me sad was I think my journey was a journey of a pretty immature man who had to go through a lot of hard lessons learned in order to become, the Tiger 6 that people were seeing on the outside. And even that version of Tiger 6 was not perfect by any means, as everyone who's worked with me knows. But I think not being in the infantry community and being able to directly share a lot of those lessons learned to, the junior lieutenants and the NCOs kind of makes me sad a little bit. So I think coming here and having a chance to share not just like the highlight reel of like the things that I've been through in my career, but kind of the low light reel and the lessons that were difficult to swallow and difficult to learn. The people that had to endure my, you know, bad, my bad experiences with me and showed me grace through that. Being able to tell that story, I think, is kind of where I really want to focus on. And then, of course, we'll talk about Tiger Company
Yeah.
towards the end.
That's awesome, man, and I really appreciate that because we throw out the word vulnerability and like the ability for people to talk about some of the things that they struggled with, and open up to people, and all of a sudden that you learn just more from those situations than just like the positive stuff, because we all, I think, have more negative things that have happened to us in our lives and in our careers than the positive stuff. And when you throw out a lot of the positives or 5 lists and you say things like create a good culture and create a winning team that everybody wants to be a part of, and people go, yeah, no shit, but like how do you do something like that?
Exactly.
You're like, well, it's because of all the mistakes that we saw or all the poor examples that you also got to see along the way. And you're like, okay, whatever we do, don't do that. And all of a sudden you just remove a bunch of the negative stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, you kind of just jumped into it a little bit, but like, what is it that you hope when people hear Mike Kim and your name, like, what do you hope that they think or what they feel?
I think as a leader and as a teammate, one thing that I've started to really want to hang my hat on is to be the guy that picks up the phone whenever someone calls. There's a lot of different ways that you can describe or quantify leadership and being a teammate. But I think true leadership and true servitude and being a teammate, to your peers and to your subordinates, it comes at a cost. And a lot of times that cost is your effort or your time. And it can be difficult, when you're weighing a bunch of different things, to be willing to pay that cost every time. But, something as simple as telling myself, whenever someone calls, I'll pick up the phone no matter what. I think it sets a baseline for I'm willing to pay whatever the price is, for the people around me. And it's simple and it's executable. And, I feel like it's come in handy and it's been executed multiple times, with results. And, just recently, one of my old squad leaders called me. I was in the middle of a run, easily could have ignored it. Who knows if he would have called back or if I would have remembered to call him back. And he needed a character statement for something that he's going through.
Mm-hmm.
And I was more than happy to, take some time and write him up a character statement. And he was actually a guy that Don Castle and I both worked with, amazing NCO. And at the end of the day, I think it worked out to his benefit and he was able to, have all those character statements be factored in. And I'm glad and I'm thankful that I had that mantra, like I'm picking up the phone no matter what.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I hope that people think of me as someone that they know that they can rely on. When they call me, I'll pick up the phone and help them no matter what.
Yeah. I think that we can keep coming back to that as we go through the conversation, because, the ability to do what you just said, pick up the phone, be willing to pay the price. There's so many different areas throughout our career where and conditions that you need to set in order to be able to do that for the rest of your life.
Definitely.
Like for example, like if you work in a skiff and you never have your phone on you for 12 hours a day, like you can never do what you just said. Like you will never be that person that can just pick up the phone when someone calls. They needed you at that moment. They didn't need you 6 hours later, whether it be your family, whether it be a close friend or somebody that really, needed your help, at that moment. So there's so many different ways that we can be available for people at the time where they need it the most.
Definitely, sir.
Not a couple days later or a month later, or, hey, when I get done with this assignment, then maybe I can help you out with that next thing. That's awesome, man. I appreciate it. Why'd you join the Army in the first place? Like before we even get into like where you went to school in West Point and all that stuff, but like, what was it that drove you in this direction in the first place?
It's funny, sir. Some people are lucky to just know what their calling is in life early. And I have drawings that I made when I was 5 or 6 years old of me in a uniform or soldiers in uniform. And I don't know. I think the idea of the Army, whether I fully knew what that meant or not, was something that always appealed to me. And then when I was in high school, I grew up in the 9/11 era. I think I was in maybe second or third grade when 9/11 happened. And so, it was something that was always being talked about. And I just knew, especially when I went to high school and was reflecting on what I wanted to do next, that the Army was the move for me. Not the Navy, not the Air Force, but the Army, where the focus is on people. And so originally my plan was to enlist, and mostly because I didn't know the difference between officers, NCOs, what the academies were, or anything. And so, all I knew for joining the Army was to enlist. But I actually had a kind of a mentor of mine, upperclassman. He was the team captain of the soccer team, and I ended up, growing up and becoming team captain of the soccer team. His name was Dimitri Del Castillo, and he ended up going to West Point ahead of me. And that was kind of the first time I learned about what West Point was. And my parents were really excited about the fact that I was going to be choosing to go to college instead of enlisting. So it kind of, the two worlds came together, and it ended up being the only school I applied to.
Wow.
If it wasn't West Point, my plan was to enlist. And, luckily I got accepted. And so my Army journey kind of began there.
That's cool. And I can relate just watching Ryan, our daughter go through the same process, and, the schools that she applied for and the things that they want. And then watching our son go off to the Army, we knew that he was going to do that from the time he was in middle school,
Mm-hmm.
so I feel like I can relate in terms of like watching that happen as a parent, and and then watching it happen for myself, like knowing that's why I was gonna head off to the Army and figure out what I wanted to do when I grow up. I'm still trying to figure it out, still trying to figure out what I'm gonna do, after. What were the first couple of years at West Point like?
It was an adjustment for me a little bit, because the learning curve was just so big about what the Army was. Like I said, I didn't know that West Point was for officers or to commission future officers. So, when I showed up, we have our version of basic training, Beast. And I remember day one, they lined us up and they went down the line like, "Hey, why do you want to be here?" And I remember saying, like, "I want to be a sniper." And they were like, "Hey, brother, I think you're in the wrong place. Like, we don't pump out snipers here at West Point. We pump out officers." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I think I have some figuring things out to do to figure out, what really it is that I'm doing there and what I do want to do moving forward." And I think pretty quickly I started to learn, okay, so there's different branches in the Army. The infantry is probably where I'm gravitating towards. That's where there are snipers, even if I'll never be one. And so I slowly started to learn over time, what the Army was. And I think that adjustment was pretty big for me. But the rest of it, kind of like the routine, the discipline, the PT and stuff like that, I loved it. I mean, it fit me like a glove. I enjoyed every minute of it. I felt like it was the right place for me. And so that part of the transition I felt like was pretty easy.
Yeah. And I asked this to Ryan a lot about some of her teammates and the people that she's like on their left and right. And it's like, how many people were in the same boat as you versus how many people, showed up and they knew everything. Like their parents were in the Army. Their parents did go to West Point. They had an uncle or a brother or somebody that did do it. So they knew all these answers, and they kind of look at us crazy when they're like, that you didn't know that this was what you're getting yourself into? And like, no, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. What was kind of the percentages of people that were like you versus the people that knew exactly what they were doing?
That's a good question, sir. I think it felt like everybody kind of knew what was going on there. Now, at least the difference between like officers and NCOs. Like, I thought the cadets there were staff sergeants that were like also drill sergeants somewhere else in the Army. Turns out they were just cadets. But now that I kind of reflect and look back, I happened to be in the company with a lot of the football recruits. And so, I think a lot of them probably were going through the same thing as me, kind of the shock of learning what the Army was, what they got themselves into and stuff like that, just because it probably for a lot of them wasn't what they were working towards for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I know my perception at the time during Beast was, wow, I'm really behind. Everybody knows what they are doing here, and I need to figure out what my purpose is quick.
Yeah.
But Yeah, it probably wasn't as overwhelming as it actually felt at the time.
Yeah. Everybody, I think it's just human nature to think that you're the only one going through, those circumstances. Everybody else has got it all figured out.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I asked Ryan today, I said, if I'm talking to somebody, what are the things I should ask? And she said, well, they want to know like practical, things that they could be applying like right now, or that they could be looking forward to, not just when they become a lieutenant or they get out, but like things that you didn't think were a big deal then, and now you think it's a big deal now that they should be paying more attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one's easy for me. I've reflected on this one a lot. I often say I don't have a lot of regrets in life, but maybe my one regret is what I majored in at West Point. Because, for me, I knew I wanted to be an infantryman. I knew I wanted to make the Army, or I thought I knew that I wanted to make the Army a career. And so I wish I had studied something that I was just interested in and passionate about, because I ended up double majoring in operations research, which is also known as industrial engineering, and economics. And a lot of that was just to, make my parents happy, but also, hedge my bets for if I if the Army doesn't work out, maybe I can get out and get a job with these degrees. And I can tell you, back then, I feel the same way now as I did back then about my love and like commitment for the Army. I feel like I just knew that it was something that I wanted to do. And the reason why I kind of say all that is because I suffered so much through academics, pushing myself, double majoring when I didn't have to. And, my experience suffered for it, I think, a little bit. I didn't get to be in the moment and focus on, you know, the people around me and the place I was in as much as I wish I could have. But also my GPA suffered for it. I was kind of putting myself in a field that I wasn't naturally curious in and that I wasn't passionate about. And now that I'm in a position where I'm going to grad school, that does matter, and
Yeah.
I am about to study something for the Army that's going to be useful in my, purpose for the Army moving forward. And, luckily I was still able to go to the school that I wanted to, but I think very easily I could have set myself up for failure down the road. Back then, I didn't think I would ever go to grad school. I wasn't really a school guy, so
Right.
I didn't think it was something I was even interested in. And I remember mentors saying, "Hey, don't forget about your GPA. You're going to want a good one if you want to go to grad school one day." And I remember thinking, "Yeah, there's no way I'm going to grad school." But I think a lot of roads lead to grad school, whether you stay in the Army or you get out. And even if you don't feel passionate about that level of education at the time, I think it's just something that I wish I'd thought about, when I was still in school.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think so many people can relate to what they studied versus what their branch is once they go into the Army. And then likewise, when you got a project later on in life and you're working on, I remember somebody saying, when you go to grad school, make sure that your project is something that you look forward to waking up on a Saturday morning and working on.
Exactly.
Or staying up late working on, because if you're just grinding through it and you hate the topic, it's going to make it miserable.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that early on as we go through. What was the last couple of years of West Point like before you headed out into the Army? And like, what did you start to have as like expectations of what the real Army was going to be like?
I was really nervous about going into the infantry. Kind of junior year, I knew, okay, I'm in a position where I can definitely get infantry if I want it. And I wanted it, but growing up and coming through high school into West Point, I was never a PT stud. And so I remember looking at a lot of guys and instructors and mentors that I looked up to and being like, man, those guys, they were made for the infantry. And I felt like I'm not built for that. You know, my natural God-given physical ability isn't to crush, a 35-minute 5 mile and crush a 2 hour 12-mile ruck or anything like that. And I was getting kind of nervous about, man, do I have what it takes to cut it in the infantry? And, you know, the guy that I talked to you or brought up earlier, Dimitri Del Castillo, he ended up being killed in action in Kunar out of 25th ID. But one of the last conversations I had with him was after he graduated range school. asking him like, hey, can you give me some advice whether you think that I have what it takes to cut it and make it through Ranger School? And I mean, his advice was simple, just, take small steps at a time, plan your training, build yourself up over time. It's not going to be done in one day, but what he said was like, if I can do it, you can do it.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people say that, but for a guy like me, when I look at a lot of these people, when they say, oh, if I can do it, you can do it. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not like you though.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I don't feel like that's always resonating with me as maybe they hope. But I really feel like when I say, hey, if I can do it, you can do it. It was a long process. Like I remember, I think it was maybe Cal year. I was trying to go to air assault school and I failed the qualifying 12-mile ruck march to even be able to sign up to go. And at that moment, I was really at a crossroads, like, man, maybe I should pivot to something else. Maybe I don't have what it takes. And, in that moment when I was low and feeling down on myself, my TAC officer, Major Rick Wirtz, he was a 7th group Green Beret. He like grabbed me and was like, hey man, what are you doing? You quitting on yourself? Like, let's go on a ruck again tomorrow and let's reattack this. And I was like, dude, I just failed my first 12-miler. What makes you think I'm going to pass tomorrow? And he paced me, he encouraged me, he pushed me, and I barely made the 12-mile cutoff, and I was able to go to air assault.
That's awesome.
And then, every time you stack a small win like that, it gets easier and easier. And I remember, that began my real deliberate train up going into air assault school, which is the first Army school I ever went to. And the 12-mile ruck at the actual, course itself ended up being easy. And so, I don't know, I just think it just taught me a lesson on, not giving up on people when they fail the first time, and not letting people, quit on themselves early on in their career when they're trying to do things that are pushing themselves.
Yeah. I think I've learned over the years that, the phrase of if I made it through, anybody can make it. It's like a double-edged sword. Like it works in some cases, but in other cases, people are like, you made it sound like it was going to be so easy,
Yeah, exactly.
But then other times you got to say, hey, this thing that you're about to do might be the hardest thing that you've ever been through. Like it'll be the hardest thing that you've ever done, because they're going to bring all of us to our breaking point. And your breaking point and my breaking point are two different things. And the people that were so much better than us, that were faster and stronger, their breaking point was so much out further than ours. And so, everybody gets to that point in a different way. We just got to be careful about the way we give advice to people based on all of the experience and the knowledge and everything that we have. You got to kind of go back and think, like, where were you at that moment in your career? And it was just, don't give up on yourself, and find people that have made it and ask. Because, the Ranger School question is something I've been dealing with for 30 years, which is, what do I got to do to get through Ranger School? So I've either been given that advice for 30 years or telling people what I did, in order to make it through, or to make it, for 30 years. And you gotta tailor it to the right audience. Yeah. What was your expectations? Now you're getting ready to head off to Bolick or to Bolick or whatever. And you obviously said you were starting to get nervous.
Yeah. So I think, that first win, and I've heard you say on the podcast before, those early wins are so important. And, I agree, because I would say post air assault school, my confidence skyrocketed, and I was no longer really nervous about going into the infantry. I was more just focused and, ready to do the work that I had kind of experienced in order to succeed at it. So coming out of West Point, they had kind of just begun a pilot program of sending guys to Ranger School before Bolick. And so it was me and I want to say 20 to 30 other guys that ended up getting selected for this pilot program. And so just a couple months after graduation, I was in Ranger School. So, that was, talk about another culture shock and another, uphill battle, having to go through a steep learning curve again. I mean, when I showed up, they were calling me and the other guys third lieutenants. When we did our Ranger tactical tasks, things that were simple for the guys who had been through Bolick, like, hey, program this 8-digit grid into your dagger. I was like, I've never seen a dagger before.
Yeah.
Like, how am I supposed to program a 8-digit grid, into this thing? And so, a lot of us, and because it was the first iteration of it, I think they didn't know what level of preparation they needed to give us before we went. And so, I think we were physically fit and they trained us well physically, but, the tasks and some of the tactics and stuff like that, is all brand new to us.
What was the
But
purpose
luckily,
behind sending 20 of you guys to Ranger School before BOLIC? Did they talk to you about that?
yeah, I think the intent was twofold. One was to give people who are willing to go early at least 1 or 2 shots at Ranger School before heading to their first unit, because I think Ranger School or IBOLIC was starting to experience difficulty. At least this is what I perceived it to be. They were experiencing difficulty making sure everybody had 1 or 2 shots at Ranger School before heading to their first duty station.
Uh-huh.
So by sending a cohort before, that guaranteed us at least 1 shot and then probably 2, because we could have gone again after BOLIC. But I think the second the hope was that we were going to pass Ranger School and then be able to bring that fresh experience into BOLIC.
That makes sense.
And the truth is we did that. Most of us made it through, and we were able to share on a daily basis as we're doing patrols during BOLIC all the things that we experienced at Ranger School. So I think that aspect of it was successful. And from what I understand, I think they're still doing that program where they're sending guys straight from West Point.
Okay. All right. The second part of that makes sense to have some people that were in BOLIC with the cadets. I'm sorry, with the second lieutenants now that has already been through school that can be that person to kind of give them advice. I got to be that person when I was going through BOLIC. I already had my tab when I got there, and I got to help the folks going through BOLIC prepare for Ranger School. I could not imagine, going through not knowing those things, because I spent a year and a half in the Ranger Battalion, and that's all they talked about was what you're going to need to do to get through Ranger School. And it took me a year to figure out, what all those different things before they thought I was ready to go and give it a shot. So
I will say, sir, I think it was beneficial actually to go before BOLIC, because I think, at BOLIC, the downside is they talk about Ranger School so much. All these young lieutenants that I talked to have this just crazy crushing pressure looming over their heads about Ranger School, whereas we showed up and our mentality was we're just going to do our best. And I think that's kind of the easier mentality to go to school with, But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. So.
No, I mean, the fact that we're talking about it right now, again, when I was in BOLIC, Ralph Puckett came and spoke to all the infantry officers, and he said, for the rest of your life, if you're ever in a conversation with another Ranger, within 5 minutes, you'll be talking about Ranger School.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Here we are again. So he's like, people wanted to ask him all these different questions about becoming a leader. And he's like, the only thing you need to be thinking about right now is going through Ranger School.
Definitely.
Back then. And I think it's still true, and it puts such this, expectation over your head before you go out to your first unit. And part of me says rightfully so, because your soldiers deserve to have the leader that's the most prepared that they possibly can be. It would be the equivalent of, are you going to send somebody out to an aviation unit and we're not going to send them to Fort Rucker, and whether they pass or not, they're going off to their unit. No, they have to pass flight school in order to go out and fly a helicopter. So we're not going to just say, go give it 1 shot. And if you don't make it on your first shot, come back after you're a captain.
That's true. Yeah,
you have to get through flight school in order to go be an aviator. So,
and that expectation was cleared to all of us. I felt like, going in. So,
yeah, amen. What was it like? Okay, so you leave Fort Benning, and where's your first unit, and what was that like?
So my first duty station, originally coming out of West Point, it was supposed to be 3CR going down to Fort Hood, which I'm from Texas, so I was happy about that. But my time at BOLIC kind of made me feel like I want to go to an airborne unit. So I actually looked up battalion commanders across, global, that were in Alaska, at Fort Bragg, in Italy. And I just cold emailed like 7 battalion commanders, highly motivated second lieutenant, wants to serve in your battalion. And I got maybe 3 responses. One of them was like, hey, maybe this isn't fully appropriate, like work through the S1 channels or something like that. And then I got 2 responses, both from Alaska, saying, "Hey, we'd
Hell
love to
yeah.
have you." And so Lieutenant Colonel Matt Hardman, now I think Brigadier General Matt
Yes.
Hardman, was, oh yeah, he was the COG at JRTC. So
Yeah.
you probably,
I know, Matt.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he responded and he was like, "Hey, we'd love to have you. Come on up." So I got my orders changed and I ended up going up to Alaska for my first duty station. So kind of a cool story on, if you want something, don't be afraid
Amen.
to ask for it. You
Amen.
know?
When I was the battalion XO out in 173rd, I would email the first sergeant there at Bolick and say, "Tell me who the 4 best people right now at school are." And he would give me the names, and I would email them and say, "How'd you like to come to the 173rd?" And
Wow.
most of the time it was, I didn't even know this was possible. I didn't even
Yeah.
know something like this was possible. And it's like, it is absolutely possible, because some of the people that were assigned to go to those units don't want to go anymore, whether they were not
Yeah.
successful at Ranger School, they were not successful at Airborne School. And we had to fill those spots. And they
Yeah,
perfectly
absolutely.
wanted to take some of the other spots that were out there. I think it's about finding, you don't know exactly what you're looking for. And then you get out to Fort Benning and you're staring at those airborne towers every day, and you go to
Yep.
airborne school and you realize this is the direction I want to go. And some people are
Exactly.
realizing that's not the direction I want to go.
Yeah.
And we should make a couple swaps, not 100 swaps, but we do make
No.
a few of those every year.
Yeah. Yeah, sir. So yeah, I ended up going up to Alaska, and when I first showed up, we were kind of, I think, gearing up to go to JRTC, and Lieutenant Colonel Hardman, or then Lieutenant Colonel Hardman, had a couple platoons that were open, waiting for Ranger Tab second lieutenants to show up. And so, right when I showed up, reported to the 3 shop, he pulled me aside and said, "Hey, brother, you're going to Charlie Company, second platoon, starting tomorrow."
Yeah, tomorrow, not in a month. Tomorrow.
Yep.
Yeah. And so now you find yourself in a platoon, you're down there, you're with great people. You spend a couple years. How many years did you spend out there?
So I actually spent a little over 4 years in Alaska, sir. But did my PL XO time, and then while I was in XO, we deployed to Afghanistan. I pinned captain overseas. We were doing a VSO uplift mission with I think 5th group at the time. So then when I came back, I dropped a selection packet and went to selection twice. Those didn't work out, but that kind of extended my timeline. So I was there, I want to say, like almost 4.5 years, which is pretty long.
Yeah. What was the biggest takeaway from those first few years? So, your first assignment, you switched over to the airborne, you get out there, you do a deployment, you do a selection. What's the biggest takeaway from those first couple of years, before you headed off to the captain's career course for people?
Yeah, sir. I think, this time of my career, when I reflect now on it, I had made so many mistakes that I'd love to talk about here, but you know, I was so immature and I didn't even realize it during that time. And I was learning a lot of lessons that I didn't fully comprehend and know how to execute until probably more as a senior captain, I think. And so it's been interesting kind of reflecting on some of those things that happened during those years and connecting the dots on, lessons and realizations that I've had over just the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could kind of jump into that, sir.
Yeah, please. Please.
So I think, one of the things that really formed, so I guess where I'll start is, as company grade officers and above, or company commanders and above, we talk about leaders being mature or immature quite a bit, I think. And, early on, I was labeled as one of the immature platoon leaders. And I remember, then Lieutenant Colonel Matt Hardman counseling me and being like, "Hey, tactically, you're great, but I need a little more maturity from you." And he would say that to me directly, but I didn't understand what that meant. I thought I was mature. And so, peeling back the onion, I think I've kind of started to figure out a lot of what it was. So when I showed up to my first platoon, I had a dream team. Sergeant First Class Bobby Edwards, and then my 4 squad leaders were all staff sergeants, which was kind of rare because, usually you have E5s serving up as squad leaders, but I had all 4 staff sergeant squad leaders. All 4 of them now are company first sergeants in airborne battalions, or other places doing great things. So I mean, the talent there, to have 4 future first sergeants as your squad leaders, I mean, that's kind of rare.
Was
And I
this right
remember
before a
showing
deployment when you had the
this.
four staff sergeants? Because when Second Lieutenant Leclerc showed up to my platoon, I had Sergeant First Class Copty. I had four staff sergeants, and two of them came from two different. And it's like, hey, you might not have that right now, but when it's time to deploy, it seems like it all comes together, especially when you know the deployment's coming.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, sir. I think we were ramping up for deployment, so guys were flowing in. We were an airborne battalion, so a lot of guys coming in from the 82nd and 173rd.
Or coming down
And
from
so
division to fill a squad leader
exactly,
because it's time to go. It's time to go do it.
exactly. And so the level of talent that we had and that I had in that platoon, when I showed up, I was in awe of the NCOs, one, but two, I wanted to just be a part of them. As a young second lieutenant, you kind of dream about that moment walking into your first platoon. And so I think that is actually where the immaturity started. Was I had such a dream team. My focus kind of became my boys and down. Like, I
Yeah.
want to make them happy. I want to lead them well, and I want to build our platoon the way that that they're coaching me to do it. And in a lot of ways, that's great. And for me, it was kind of a dream situation. But I think what developed over time was I never learned how to be a good platoon leader for my company commander, or how to be a good platoon leader for my battalion commander.
Yeah.
I was so focused on being a good platoon leader for my platoon sergeant and my squad leaders. And I think that's a trap that a lot of young lieutenants fall into, because it's so tempting to want to be, they say, like, quote unquote, for the boys, or now it's, for the ladies and gentlemen in the infantry. And you lose focus on what your part is to play in the battalion.
When you think about like what the leaders need from you as the platoon leader, the one thing you got to make sure that you also do is you take every opportunity to learn everything that there is about being a platoon leader. The squad live fires, the team live fires, all those little things, how to the load plans look on the vehicles, to like those little things. Because once you move on and it's XO time, or you move on to company commander, you can't like go backwards and learn those things. Like, you need to know like exactly how long it takes to set up a patrol base, and like how long it takes, whatever your MOS or your branch might be, those things at the platoon. That is your only time to become an absolute expert on the things that platoon needs to be able to do. And so don't, like, for those that are listening, don't take what Mike's saying is saying, don't think about those things. You absolutely must be a pro at those things, because there are people that see, they care more about what their leadership thinks than what the young folks thinks. And don't think for a second that your company commander and battalion commander don't see right through that. Like, they see right through it, and they're like, what you need to worry about is making sure that this squad live fire goes fucking awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I guess and just to kind of clarify what I meant, I feel like as an Army officer, there's kind of 5 stakeholders or interests that are pulling on you. So you kind of have yourself in your career, you have your formation, like your platoon as a platoon leader, you have your leaders, company commander, battalion commander, you have the organization, the unit, and then you have the mission. So you kind of have like those 5 buckets. And when I was a lieutenant, I used to think that those were mutually exclusive. So I felt like if I want to take care of the platoon and the mission, then that means myself, my leaders, and the organization maybe have to fall to the wayside.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand how those could all combine, and I could accomplish making sure that I was prioritizing all 5 of those in a way that was nested with each other. And I guess a way to illustrate that is, I took the platoon, we trained up, we trained hard. I really believed in kind of old school discipline inside the platoon, and I had the NCOs to execute that. And when we went and jumped into JRTC, we got picked as the brigade DO. So we jumped in and we kind of had the mission that we wanted. And I was so fixated on my platoon doing the mission, for the brigade, that we were kind of starting to run off and outpace the brigade and do our own thing. And I kind of knew that if I communicated with my company commander too much, then he would pull us back. And I wanted the platoon to be able to go and attack and be aggressive and, be bulldogs. And I remember, there were maybe days at a time that I didn't talk to my company commander, And I think that's where I'm trying to say,
yeah,
looking back, man, that I was an absolute liability of a platoon leader,
yeah.
Although I thought I was doing the right thing by being aggressive and I'm going to attack until my company commander has to pull me back. And I'm going to train my men so that we're ready, so that we can do everything that we think is right in the moment. And, almost no part of me thought, hey, what does my company commander need of me right now?
Yeah.
What information does he need me to feed him? How does that nest with my battalion commander and the staff? Any of these things. I didn't once think about any of that stuff. And I think part of it is education. When you go through BOLIC and Ranger School, all you think about is the tactical side. Not often are we actually educated and taught about why reporting is important and what kind of decisions your company commander is making and how you have to feed into that and stuff like that. And so I think it's just, I want to encourage young leaders out there who are passionate about the tactics, which I think a lot of us infantrymen automatically are, but just to be able to take a step back and also think about, what does your boss need from you and be able to nest into that.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate you keep going on that topic and then in that area, because the only way to get better in those areas is by somebody telling you and somebody communicating it to you. It can't just be like, I love how Matt Hardman said to you, like, maturity, but I'm going to explain to you some of the examples of what that is. And then from your company commander as well, what they need from you. You can't just get mad at people and say, why do you not understand this? Well,
exactly.
Help them understand it. Help them figure it out. Give them an example of how they needed to better communicate so that things could get synchronized. So now you're learning a bunch of lessons there before you head out to the captain's career course. Did you reflect on that again and say, I'm going to go into the captain's career course and these are the things that I really want to focus on in order to get better?
Well, actually, before, the captain's career course, I kind of had two more lessons that I had to learn before. One of them was learning to love being a staff officer, because I did my PL time. I was HACXO, deployed, came back, and then I was in S3 shop as the AS3. And at that point, I'm kind of the senior lieutenant in the battalion. So that's usually, AS3 is kind of usually where those guys end up funneling to. And I remember showing up to the 3 shop. And remember, I had never served a single day in the 3 shop at this point because I walked straight into a platoon. And I remember just being so disappointed that I ended up in the dreaded S3 shop. And I walked in, I had a bad attitude. I thought, this is not what we infantrymen are supposed to be doing, is sitting at a desk doing all these things. And I remember my S3 at the time, now Lieutenant Colonel Austin Commons, he's out in the 173rd. I think he's a battalion commander. He was ex-Ranger Regiment guy. He was the RRC commander back when he was there. But he pulled me into his office and he was like, hey, brother, look, I know you think that staff work isn't sexy, but this is where the morale of the battalion is built. Good staff work leads to soldiers being able to execute good training, morale increasing, and like the battalion operating more efficiently. And we need people in here that are passionate about that and excited to do the work. I don't want people in here who are just going to be dragging their feet, just trying to do the minimum to get out, to get out and go home the next day. And, at first he said that to me and it didn't really click, but then watching him work every day, being the S3, not as a disgruntled field grade, but as a passionate field grade who felt like everything that he was doing was for the soldiers, completely changed my perspective on staff. And, the coming probably year or so that I've worked with him, I really grew to love the staff work. I was only on staff at the battalion and brigade level, but I really grew to love the staff work. Going to the field as staff, there is a teamwork element to it for sure that I didn't appreciate at the time. But, I think there's an attitude that needs to be taught coming into staff, that it is important. And in a lot of ways, it's some of the most important work that directly correlates to soldiers' morale.
Yeah. I like the way you describe that because there's a phrase I've been using a lot where it's being the example or just demonstrating the right thing to do isn't good enough anymore. You know, not now you have to actually teach people, how you got to that point. And the way you said the morale of the battalion is built in the 3-shop, and the way you don't just pour yourself into it, you inspire the people that are around you to also understand it and now see the fruits of your labor and see.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I can imagine that same thing happened when you showed up here to the 25th Infantry Division and you're back in a 3-shop and you're like, I'm going to use those same phrases. I'm going to be
Yeah,
that
100%.
example as a field grade,
Yeah.
when they're out there.
Yeah, because when I showed up to Hawaii, there was a phrase that was taught to me that I can look back and apply to all this, which was, then Colonel Van Antwerp, now I think Brigadier General Van Antwerp. He was the DCGO, and he did PT with me and my company one time, and he said a phrase that has stuck with me and kind of been a guiding principle in a lot of things that I do, which was think about what you want the soldiers to feel when they walk away from whatever event it is that you're planning or executing. And it made me think, hey, what are the most miserable moments that I've had in the military? Well, it's when I show up to the range and there's no ammo and we're sitting there complaining about what are we doing here, wasting our time? Why are we sitting at this range without ammo? Or going somewhere and going to a range and the SDZs weren't planned properly. So now we're canned to a very limited Wi-Fi. And then we're thinking, wow, this isn't realistic at all. Like as we walk away from that training event, we walk away thinking this isn't realistic at all. Like why are we doing this canned event? And a lot of that all starts with the staff work, And so a lot of what Major Commons, or now Lieutenant Colonel Austin Commons, was teaching me back then on staff was imagine the soldiers walking away from the event that your PowerPoints are planning.
Yeah.
How do you want them to feel? Because you have the power in that moment to plan an event thorough enough and rehearsed enough to where they walk away thinking, man, what a great event that was. That was a highlight of my career. You can do that. And that happens all the time. We've all been through both ends of that spectrum, walking away feeling disappointed and walking away feeling exhilarated by a training event. And I think that is the power that a motivated staff can have.
Yeah. And when he shared that with you, those comments, and he's like, think about what you want people to feel when they walk away. I want people to come to JPMRC and I want them to walk away saying, this was the greatest training exercise I've ever been a part of. Right.
Exactly.
But now what we got to do is we got to go rewind the tape a little bit and go backwards and say, okay, so what are some of those things that you need to do in order to make them, feel that way? And most of the time it's like we've been through one of those exercises. I've been through one of those live fires that made me walk away feeling like I know what I'm doing. I trust the people on my left and right. I trust the equipment that I've been given. I trust that I can use the equipment. I now know what it feels like to put a Bangalore under the concertina wire, how far you need to be. I now feel that, right? So you've been through some of those, and you have to create some of those opportunities for people to see it, and then they have to be able to feel it. What was the other thing that you said you had another big, huge lesson?
Yeah. So this other thing was, I'm almost embarrassed to share it, and I think it's important that I do because I think it kind of drives into other lessons that I learned while I was in company command. But at this point, I had been in Alaska for about 4 years. So I was kind of the senior guy, one of the senior guys in the battalion. And it's kind of a lesson about loyalty. And so long story short, we were in the middle of EIB train up and EIB. And, as you know, sir, the 2 weeks leading up to EIB are pretty grueling and intense train up. And so it was the week before EIB execution while we were doing the train up. Out of nowhere, we got a brigade run slopped on us. And it was actually also the morning after we did land nav. So we were coming out of land nav 3 hours later, standing in formation to do a brigade run. And at the time, I think I was a junior captain just promoted. I didn't have kind of the maturity to just take and roll with the punches. And I was so upset that this brigade run got thrown in during EIB train up that, I was walking around and I had a lot of personal rapport with the NCOs and officers across both infantry battalions in Alaska. And I was going around saying like, hey, I'm going to zonk this run. I'm going to zonk this run. And I was getting buy-in from everybody because everybody was upset about it. And I remember at the time, I had a great relationship with my battalion commander, my S3 and my XO. And, I wasn't really being serious about it, but I was upset. And that was how I knew how to communicate it, was kind of by doing this. And I went up to the XO and I was like, hey, sir, what do you think if I zonk this run? And he was like, Mike, absolutely not. What are you thinking? Like, this is a brigade run. We're going to fall in line and we're going to execute. And I was like, okay, Roger, sir. So then we start the run. And to this day, I don't know exactly what happened, but I remember turning to my NCO and being like, man, imagine though, if I just said zonk. And when I said that, everybody ran. Everybody in my battalion and half the people in our sister battalion all ran. And I've heard stories that maybe someone else had yelled zonk in the back of the formation, but it just happened at the exact same time that I just didn't yell, but said zonk to my NCO next to me. That I fully, to this day, whether they ran because I said it or he said it, I had set the stage for it. So, I ended up completing that run. And it was basically the battalion commander and the staff. And I was the AS3, so I was up there in the front. And the shame, the burning shame that I felt in our, 30-man battalion formation, completing the brigade run, it just made me realize a couple things. And one is the power that kind of informal leadership has in a formation and your infectious attitude can have, and how careful you have to be as you wield it. Every word you say will be absorbed by the people who look up to you. So that was kind of lesson one. And lesson two was a lesson of, man, I let down my battalion and brigade commander so hard, whether I agreed or disagreed with their decision. It was moral, ethical, and legal. And I had no business undermining their authority. And, my battalion commander pulled me in after the run, very emotionally expressed his disappointment in me, which was, this was one of the most heartbreaking and devastating moments of my career, just completely being disloyal to my commander, who I had a great relationship with. And I kind of swore that day, I'm not going to make a mistake like this again. I'm going to wield whatever informal leadership authority I have. I'm going to wield it carefully, and I'm going to be loyal to my commander. Now, I wish I could say that was the last time I made a mistake like that. And that's kind of where I want to continue to share how I made multiple mistakes that were required for me to finally learn some of these lessons. And hopefully by sharing them, leaders that are in my shoes understand kind of the gravity of some of the decisions that they can make. But that kind of wraps up my time in Alaska, I think, sir.
Yeah. A couple of those things on the lessons that you talked about, Mike, was that, you said I made more mistakes after that, right? The people that learn from their mistakes, they are always given more responsibility. They're going to get even harder challenges in the future, right? They're going to become field grades. And now you're going to get even more challenging situations, which are going to give you more opportunity to make more mistakes, going forward. Whereas if you hadn't learned from that comment you said about, I would swear to myself that I would be loyal to my commander. If you hadn't learned from that, you never would have been a company commander.
That's true.
No one would have put you in company command and handed you that guide on. Because they would have said, you didn't learn from that. I can see it from a mile away. This person is not going to be loyal to the command. And why in the world would we put them in charge of a bunch of humans and families, right? So
Absolutely.
they can see it. So the bigger your mistakes, the more you learn, the more opportunity you will be given to make way more mistakes, and in some case, mistakes that have a lot more important going forward too.
Yeah, definitely, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. So I appreciate you sharing some of those, and we'll keep putting those into some of the topics as we keep going forward here. And after that, I want to talk about company command, but I also want you to start when you talking about the transition to becoming a FAO, right? Because like you talked about how hard that transition has been. It couldn't have. It had to have started to go into your head when you were a company commander. Like these things have to start. Like they have to start finding their way in. Sometimes, or maybe they're not. But let's talk about those 4 or 5 years.
Okay, so coming out of MCCC Maneuver Captain's Career Course, I ended up going to Hawaii. During the AIM cycle, I interviewed with Major Ben Hardig and ended up in the Warrior Brigade. And my time on staff there was amazing. I kind of brought that mentality that I talked to you about that was taught to me by Austin Commons. But I mean, the team that we had there, you've already interviewed Mac Lawler and Trevor Goki and, some of the guys that were on staff and in command at that time. And we just had an incredible group of leaders. And we were working for Neil Mayo, who was just one of the most incredible, charismatic leaders you could ever work for. And so had a great time on staff, went to JRTC with you, sir, actually, when you were Rattlesnake 6. I was the night battle captain up at Brigade.
Oh, yeah.
And, I learned a lot about teamwork on that staff, actually. That's a competitive environment when you're a captain on brigade staff or a major on division staff. And I think it can be easy to be really focused on your own success. But I felt like teamwork is infectious. It really just takes one person starting and breaking the mold for everyone to start to adopt a mentality of we're going to build each other up until that team is just completely cohesive and for each other. And the guy who actually started that for us on brigade staff is a guy named Adrian Rincon. I don't know if you ever really worked with him that much, but he was a planner on brigade staff. But I remember just him serving us as our peer and not letting us fail no matter what it costed himself. And man, experiencing that firsthand from a peer on staff when we're all competing for command was pretty eye-opening for me. I mean, it was a lesson that I kind of first learned at Ranger School about, hey, if you pour into others first, you'll get yours naturally. That lesson was exhibited on a different scale, on staff when, careers are kind of at stake. And it kind of changed my outlook on what kind of a teammate I wanted to be based on his role model. But thanks to him, we all succeeded. We all ended up taking command. I ended up going down to Gimlets, working under, Colonel Rick Turner. And when I was down there on staff, he told me, hey, you're going to be taking Tiger Company here in a couple months.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that pouring yourself into the others and seeing that they'll be successful. And, I think that is often misunderstood, right? And the people like that their teammates look at and say, that's the greatest teammate, that we have on this staff. Talk more about like what it means to be a great teammate.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying about picking up the phone, being a good teammate costs something. If it didn't cost something, everybody would be a great teammate and it wouldn't be such a rare thing to see. I guess when I talk about Adrian specifically, all of us were assigned our little foxholes and projects on brigade staff. I was the night cap, one of the battle captains. So I did the terrain model. I did co-ops. I did a lot of the briefings and stuff like that. And Adrian was a planner. So he was in FUOPs. He had a ton of work. I mean, under Ben Hardig, those guys were planning day and night. The planning cycle never stopped in Warrior Brigade during that time. But, Adrian would leave the plans tent to rehearse me for my brief to Warrior 6. He would come out and say, hey, we got a cub coming up. How are you feeling? Hey, run it by me. And he would give me feedback, valuable feedback. And, we're all in, in some ways, we're all in competition with each other. And this was going so far out of his way. I mean, I think everyone's willing to be a good teammate when they're going a little bit out of their way, helping each other out. We'll all build the terrain model together. We'll all pitch in to like compile the op order or whatever. But to step away from something that you're working on for an hour, knowing that that means from 02 to 03, you're making up that time.
Yeah.
That, some of these things have a heavier price than others. And when you're making and paying that price every single day for every person around you, it gets noticed, and it really does bring the team up together. And it fostered an environment where all of us felt like we owed it to each other to give each other our time, each other's time, and pay that price for each other. And so I really do think it just takes one person to start to build that mentality.
Yeah, there are so many good examples in that brigade and in our time that we were out there of what a good teammate is and how to build the right culture. What were some of the things that you started to see and you like, hey, when I get down to Tiger Company now, I'm bringing this with me to Tiger Company from a culture standpoint, from a winning standpoint?
Yeah, from that standpoint, I think there was a culture in Warrior Brigade, a team of teams. And every battalion and every, unit had such a strong, cohesive team that was in competition with the others to build, their own morale and their own strength and their own reputation. But at the same time, like you, Colonel Turner, all of the battalion commanders also had a really strong, cohesive team where, from the staff perspective, there were a lot of times that I would look across the tent and I would see Colonel Mayo and all the battalion commanders huddled up, both planning and laughing together and, sharing good times and hard work together, and then when you look across again, it's the brigade and battalion CSMs, together huddled up and talking. And I felt like when I would go down to MDF, where we were shipping equipment down to JRTC, I would see all the Gimlet Company commanders huddled up together. I just felt like everywhere I looked, there were very strong, cohesive teams of teams. And they were all bonding together and rowing together, in the same direction. So, it made me think one day when I go down to Gimlets, I want to be a part of a team like that.
Yeah. And in some cases you have to create that team, or you have to invest
Absolutely.
in that continuing a team, because it doesn't take much to go down there and to go down to a unit that might already have a good culture and start to ruin it. Right. So I'm sure you've seen some bad examples over the course of your career.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What, now you're starting to think about like, okay, I'm getting ready to go be a company commander. What were you the most nervous about getting ready to become a commander?
Honestly, sir, I think I felt almost only excitement. I wasn't really nervous about anything. I felt like all my experiences leading up to that point had prepared me in a sense to just attack being a company commander day by day. I think, one thing one thing I maybe was nervous about is I really wanted and I was hoping for a good teammate, good first sergeant, good platoon sergeants that could really just help me push the company in the direction that, we all wanted to go. And I think part of that is because my whole career up till that point, I'd been spoiled with phenomenal NCOs, throughout my whole career. But luckily I once again got spoiled with phenomenal NCOs. So any nervousness I had in that regard, as soon as I showed up to Titan Company, they were all wiped away.
Yeah. When I was growing up, when I was leaving Fort Benning and I was heading off to the 82nd Airborne, I asked somebody, George Sterling, he was like my big brother, and I said, everybody's always nervous about, their first platoon sergeant, or in this case, your company first sergeant or your counterpart, your teammate, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it might be. And I said, I'm nervous about that. What can I do to help that person be successful and help help no matter where they're at? And what he said to me was, the greatest thing that you can do to help your teammate is to be the absolute best at whatever it is you are responsible for. So be the best company commander that you can possibly be, so that your first sergeant doesn't have to worry about company commander stuff. He doesn't have to worry about the training schedules and the plans and the POIs and the briefing at the command and staff and the briefing at the training meeting. I got this, right?
Yep.
And he can worry about good order and discipline and the things that he needs to do, and so that you guys can work together as an absolute perfect team.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. I completely agree with that.
Yeah. What was some of the guidance that you got from this phenomenal, the NCOs that you got when you got down there? I'm sure you walked into somebody's office and you said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to take over. What's your advice for me?" And what did they tell you?
Yeah. So at the time, the first sergeant was First Sergeant Blake Allen, who was an absolute Gimlet legend in his own right as well. I think he went on to go teach at West Point, but he actually came to me. I was the AS3 at Gimlets at the time, and he came to me and said, "Hey, sir, I heard you're coming down to Tigers. Just get ready to bring your energy." And I was like, "Hey, roger that. That's too easy." And that was kind of it. And, from my vantage point on battalion staff, you see all the companies from a, battalion level view, and Tiger Company was the company that had energy. I was already walking into a company that had a lot of culture. And so in that sense, a lot of the work was done for me, and he just kind of came up and said, "You're the right fit. Once you come on down, just be yourself, bring a lot of energy, and then we're going to be successful." So it was pretty easy from there, actually.
Yeah. I think for those that are listening right now, your reputation will precede you no matter what. And people rumors will start. People have seen the Excel documents and the PowerPoint slides, and they'll see, like, you can't keep these things secret. And
definitely.
And these people will seek you out. And in some cases they'll give you some advice that you might not have been ready for. Like,
that's
hey,
true.
Hey, when you come down here, don't try to bring that shit that you've been doing, over
that's
here
true.
that we heard about.
Yeah.
Don't bring that stuff down to our unit. Or they'll give you something positive, and they're like, you'll see it. You'll see it in their face when they turn and they look at you and they see you from across the way. They know you're coming to their organization.
Definitely.
And your reputation will precede you. So for the NCOs, like, reaching out to those officers and letting them know what they can do to be successful and what they can maybe fix if they mess something up along the way is helpful too.
Yeah, definitely, sir. Yeah. Seeing Tiger Company from the battalion staff perspective, they were like a roaring flame of a company. And I felt like all I really had to do at that point was kind of focus them into like a laser beam. And then they were going to be, it'd be easy to take them to the next level. They had all this potential energy raging, and they were just kind of ready to take the next step, I think.
So now you get down there. Was there any surprises? You got down there and you thought you were going to focus them into this laser beam, and you get down there and you're like, oh shit, I have to focus on some other things.
I think the only thing that really surprised me was, the op tempo of 25th ID is so high. And I think other divisions would probably say the same thing, but you do have all these visions of things that you want to do. And I think the biggest challenge of modern day company commanders is finding ways and times and creative solutions for the things that you want to accomplish with your company. Because I think a growing trend that I've seen from my vantage point is, with the growing competing requirements, things are starting to elevate to higher echelons. So some training events that used to be held sacred at the company level now are being held at the battalion level for efficiency's sake, because there's so many other competing requirements. And, a lot of my peers across the formations have expressed kind of this similar challenge. So then I think what it becomes is, how can I fit in creatively some of the things that I want to accomplish with the time that I have?
Yeah. I think you talked about EIB a little bit ago, and I think that EIB is something that has been, it has not become the main thing. It has become the side thing over the years, and it was like, well, we got to pull that up to battalion, and then now that it's up at battalion or up at brigade or up at division, let's say division's running the E3B now. It's become almost too much, right? Too much for good. And there's other things going on that are competing with it. And the reason I feel that way is not just what I watch what I watched as Rattlesnake 6 and what I watched a couple weeks ago here, in Hawaii and across the Army, but what my son went through when he went through EIB as well. And it has definitely, we have lost the squad leader that's out there with their 2 team leaders and their soldiers that are out there with them to go through that thing. And your reputation is 100% on the pass rate and the success rate of the soldiers in your squad and in your platoon. It's not just about you and your ability to go out there and get your go, but it's about preparing your unit, whether you're a team leader or you're a squad leader or you're a platoon sergeant, to get them and make them be successful on the PT test at the lanes. And it almost looks like it's more individual. It's like, go out there and go get it, go try it, go shoot for it yourself. Instead of, if Kim doesn't get it, that's a knock on me as his leader to help prepare him for the exercise.
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment, sir. I mean, even from when I went, I think I went through EIB in 2015 maybe, and it was, I want to say it was a brigade run event. And even then, kind of the NCOs were saying, oh man, this is being held at the brigade. But yeah, in 25th ID, I think a brigade was running it for the division with the help of the division staff. It was kind of held up at a higher level. And because of that, the tasking was to pull all the squad leaders in who are EIB holders, and they weren't able to walk through the lanes with their soldiers. And I do think we've lost a lot of ownership of training at the lower echelons. And that was one of the things I wanted to tackle at the company level, and you have to find creative ways to be able to empower your squad leaders to do that.
Yeah. And when you talk about you're going to bring this down to your company, the reason I think it's so important is that the squad leader that was, when they were a private and their team leader took ownership of them to make sure that they got through their expert badge, right? And they got theirs, both the squad leader and the team leader and the soldier. They're going to do it when they get their stripes, because that's what was done for them.
Exactly.
And they're going to replicate the things. And so every one of these opportunities to whatever it is those soldiers are going through for the first time in their career, that is from now on the example that they believe is the right way to do it. Whether it's a PT test or EIB or a team live fire or some form of training exercise, they're going to believe that is the standard.
The right answer.
That's the right answer. Sir. And going forward. Okay. You're in company command and you got a second command, right? And you have to have this thought in your head now that's starting to think, how much longer am I going to serve in the Army? Am I going to serve long term? Or has that become at this point a sure thing? Like you're not even thinking about it anymore?
Yeah, to be honest, sir, and I hate to do this, sir, I would love to talk about some specific things that I did in Tiger Company, if we can go back to it later. Yeah. But, the truth is, when I was in company command, I was only fixated on battalion command. And really, I was just fixated on being in the Army as long as I could and being an infantryman. And, when I left 25th ID, I ended up going to 196th JPMRC. I went to 3rd Battalion down in Guam. And even then, my plan was to continue, down the road as an infantryman. But really what it was kind of a sudden turn. But, my family life, my wife and I's relationship really suffered during company command. And I think it was, the level at which I prioritized the soldiers over my wife. And our relationship was really strained. And it kind of got to a point when we were in Guam, and the op tempo at 196, sir, it's also high. We have the 3 rotations and the planning conferences in between. And she kind of laid it on me like, hey, if you want to have a family with me, we need something different.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of at a crossroads of, man, what is important to me? I love the infantry, and my plan has always been to follow that all the way through to the end. But I love my wife, and I do want to start a family. And so I had really no notion of becoming a foreign area officer at the time. I was exploring all options that were available to VTIP to or to switch over to. There was kind of like an Army software program that was emerging, kind of an AI program that was emerging, that was recruiting. I reached out to them. But I also reached out to the foreign area officer program because I thought this could be a place where I can continue to have impact. We'll get to go to grad school. I'll get to learn a language, acquire some skills to add to my own toolkit. But ultimately, because even if I do go to the Middle East, which I just came back from Jordan a couple of weeks ago, I'm going there with my wife and we can be together and start a family. So that was kind of the moment that made me pivot. And the truth is, because of the context, even after I pivoted, and my wife knows this, I was in mourning about not being an infantryman anymore. I loved the training I was getting in the foreign area officer pipeline, but I kept thinking, man, what if? But I will say, now that I've been more through the pipeline and got to experience some of what the job will be overseas, I am excited about it. And if this is my path forward in the Army, I'm excited for it, and I'm ready to go to work.
Yeah, I think that's a great attitude to have going forward. The one thing I would tell you, though, brother, is that you will always be an infantryman. You will always be a paratrooper. You'll always be a ranger. You'll always be a warrior. It doesn't matter what you'll be doing for the rest of your life, even if it's in different clothes, right?
Yeah.
Like those things will always be inside of you. And so as you go off and you find new responsibilities, right, as a foreign area officer, you're going to take all these experiences that you have with you, and you're going to make better recommendations. You're going to make better decisions. You're going to make better, you're going to give better guidance. You're going to give better advice to people going forward because of the things that you went through. Good friend of mine, Tim Peterman's also FAO, and he said the one thing that we need in FAO community is more leadership, and so you're bringing leadership, years of leadership, out to that community, and that's what they need. They need your expertise now, the language skills and all those things, but they need all that experience that you're bringing back there with them. And every unit's op tempo is through the roof. Unless you, and I wouldn't even say get out of the Army, because if you work at Google there and Anduril, like their op tempo is through the roof too. Like every organization that's worth being a part of out there is working their butts off, and they're filled with people that are giving everything they got. It becomes you now are having to figure out, you're figuring out, how do I be successful? How do I be a part of a winning team? How do I bring something to this team and have a family, and then soon to have kids? And how do I get to their practices? And how do I go to their key events? This is why it's so important to keep working on your habits and keep working on your daily routine and figuring out how you're going to manage your time, because you're not going to be able to add more things. You've got to cut away other things that don't matter anymore. And you've got to make the things that are important, faster. Let's go back to, you said you wanted to talk about a couple more things in Tiger Company and what building a winning culture and winning teams is all about.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. I think I really just want to leave a couple tangible and executable nuggets, for future company commanders. And I think, the first thing I would say is don't waste any time. You never know how much command you're going to get, and you want to leave an impact. And so the first thing you have to do, I felt like, was build relationships very quickly. And so, one of the things that I did was, on day one, I passed out a questionnaire for every soldier to write a letter to me with like certain questions answered, and I had some stuff on there like, hey, what are your parents' names? Where are you from? But also, what schools do you want to go to? What are your goals outside the Army? I think a lot of classic initial counseling type questions that we as officers get a lot from our senior leaders and stuff like that. But maybe that E4 never has a chance to have that conversation with a company commander, quickly. And so I asked a lot of these questions on this questionnaire, received 120 plus letters back from the soldiers. And for the next 3 days, I did nothing but write response letters to each soldier. And as I was writing these response letters, I had a spreadsheet that was tallying, okay, Ranger School, this soldier, this soldier, this soldier, this soldier has expressed interest. Air Assault, list of soldiers' names, Jungle School. And so it helped me build kind of a database of like, okay, this is my formation. These are who they are. These are the ones interested in these schools. These are the ones that have goals outside the Army. And it helped me informed conversations with the soldiers starting from day 2. I mean, I was able to go out and say, hey, Specialist X, we have an air assault school air assault school slot in 2 weeks. I saw in your letter that you wanted to go. You ready? Yes, sir. No, sir. Okay, you're ready? All right, let's go. And we would send them. If they say no, hey, squad leader, let's you and the team leader, let's build a deliberate plan. Hey, let's set a goal for this date. We're going to send this guy to air assault school. And tangibly, we were able to build a timeline for a lot of soldiers to go to schools that were on their bucket list that maybe they just didn't have, not the courage, like they're not courageous, but like they didn't have the setting appropriate to tell their leadership, like, hey, I have ambitions for this school or that school. And if they wanted to go to Ranger school, I mean, that was like kind of number one priority. Boom, let's train this guy up and let's send him. So that was kind of one thing that we did that I felt like was tangible. It required, there was a high cost. I probably spent 20 plus hours writing letters back to the soldiers. But the feedback I got was that they felt like they were heard and that their goals were seen,
I love that.
And then the next one was finding creative ways to train. And so one of the things that Castle and I came up with together that we're proud of was on Thursdays, we would come in at like 5:30, draw weapons, nods. We would fill radios. We would get in formation and we would patrol down to area X-ray or somewhere, we would reserve a training area and we would train battle drills or we would do patrol bases, kind of the fundamentals. We'd do ready up drills, but it became a weekly company level rehearsal of drawing nods, drawing weapons,
Amen.
putting batteries in your nods, doing radio checks. My RTO would build an X check for every Thursday. And he and the platoon RTOs would practice reporting, recording, X check calls every Thursday. And, the platoon leaders had the plan for, like we would rotate who was responsible. They had the plan for and resource either blanks or a training area or make sure the MPs knew we were coming along this road. They would have to coordinate for a small event, every Thursday. And so we would start at around 5 or 5:30. We would train until 11 and we would come for lunch and they would be cut, all the soldiers would be cut for the day. But the leaders would stay and we would continue the work that we normally had to do, which, one thing I preached was leadership. You have to pay a price for leadership too, So like the soldiers came in early, they trained all day, they get to rest. Hey, leaders, time for us to get to work, after the soldiers leave. So that was one thing that we found a lot of success with. We were able to tackle so many kind of basic battle drills and tasks that we felt like we were losing proficiency at and couldn't find time to do. It was easy to hit those every Thursday. And then, another thing that I felt like Castle and I were able to do was diagnose problems. So I think a very common thing that you hear amongst junior or new company commanders these days is, man, my team leaders and squad leaders are struggling enforcing discipline, or they're struggling to grow as leaders and have their men follow them. And it's easy to just sit back and say, well, it's just this generation of NCOs, Gen Z, they don't have the same leadership experiences that we have, and they're unable to do it the way that we did. And I don't think that's true at all. I think.
Yeah, they've been saying that forever. They said the same thing about me in the 90s.
Exactly.
The Nintendo generation.
And I think really what it is leadership for a team to respect their team leader. Something needs to happen. They'll respect the position, sure, but like something needs to happen for them to respect that man. And, during the GWOT times, NCOs were leading their men in combat and things would happen and leaders would make decisions and sacrifice for their men or make a life-saving decision, or, there's a whole plethora of things that NCOs were doing that earned the respect of their men. They had the combat experiences that the men looked up to. But I think today, as we're, training for a different threat, the team leaders that we're putting into position, they don't have the same opportunities to earn the respect from their formations that the GWOT era NCOs had. And so one thing that Castellano tried to do was inside every training event, we would embed opportunities for leaders to really lead. And so, things as simple as we had a 48-hour team sticks, kind of a Ranger School-esque event where they're doing team level patrols and different stations and stuff like that, sleep deprived, food deprived, just for 48 hours. And somewhere in that event was a station where they just got smoked. The team would just get, they would run up and down hills. They would have to, drag a Skedco. And then, 45 minutes into this hour-long grueling event, we would stop them and say, okay, hey, the next 45 minutes, you guys have two options. Team leader, you can either choose to continue the event yourself and let your men stop and eat, and like you bear the brunt of dragging this Skedco the rest of the way yourself, or you can continue on for the next 45 minutes as normal.
Like a dilemma.
Exactly. A leadership, like a crucible dilemma for team leaders to be able to show their teams what kind of a decision they would make in that environment. And out of all of our team leaders, all of them but one said, put it on me. Hey guys, rucksack flop, grab your MRE. I got this. And the response that we were getting from events like that, I mean, soldiers, you know how it is, or when you're exhausted, the pain that he's about to go through, in this grueling event or whatever, your leader's taking it on himself. As a good subordinate, you don't want him to have to do that himself. So like soldiers were saying, hey, sir, can you let us help him carry it? Like, I know he volunteered, but let us do it. And we're like, hey, the rules are the rules. Just be appreciative that you have this kind of leader who is willing to sacrifice for you guys. And they would watch him for the next 45 minutes, put the load on himself for his team. And we saw a night and day difference after events like that, where the teams just had a different level of respect for their team leaders based on what they saw their team leaders doing in action. And, we're not going into combat right now. Like, we're training for it. So it's hard to replicate some of these events, but there are ways to kind of put your leaders in positions where they're showing what they're willing to do, for their teams and squads. And I think we owe it to our leaders to give them opportunities like that so that their leadership comes a little easier.
Yeah. You said it was creating creative ways to train, but you could have just said also, we have to create the training opportunities for them to do those things. My first
Definitely.
5 years in the Army and enlisted, like, we didn't go to combat, but we did go to Panama several times. We went to Puerto Rico, we went to Germany, we went to Thailand. Like, those were the closest thing to a deployment for us. And the exercises the training events that we did were really tough. And those were the moments that were created for us to figure out what NCOs were going to make it and which ones weren't.
Exactly.
Who's going to make tough decisions, who's going to make bad decisions, who's not going to be able to keep up on the 30-mile Stan McChrystal, foot marches. You jump in, and then you march for 30 miles, like not 12. And you'd find out like who's going to fall out and who's not going to make it and who's going to be able to carry the weight. You create these crucible moments for people. It isn't just sit around and wait for them to come down or wait for that one JPMRC exercise or, this sucks. We got to go over to the Philippines for 6 months. No,
exactly.
Those are huge opportunities to prepare the Army's future leaders. Yeah.
And I think if I could just add one more, sir, I think another thing that companies are struggling with, back in the GWAT time, people knew they were training for war and they felt it. I feel like there was a different sense of urgency when you knew there was a deployment on the patch chart. And, we as senior leaders, we know the threat that's looming over us that we're preparing for in the Indo-Pacific AO. But I don't know if that same sense of urgency is understood and felt at the lowest echelons. So, one thing that we did that we also saw a lot of results from was empowering the S2 shop to come down to the company and give OSINT and sometimes secret level update briefs to the NCOs and soldiers so that they too were seeing some of the stuff that we see at the meetings that we go to at the company above, echelons. Like, we sometimes take for granted, I think, the context that we have. And so we feel that sense of urgency, but I think sometimes the team leaders don't, even if we say it to them here and there. But once the S2 shop kind of came in and was showing them, hey, like, these are things that we're seeing. These are some signs that we're seeing. This is, a whole plethora of different updates that they can give the company at a lower echelon. the level of buy-in that we felt was, the return that we got for such a simple and small act was huge. And I think it's an easy thing that formations can add, at the company level.
Yeah. And I think that the thing that they can buy into the easiest or the fastest is they buy into you. That regardless of the environment, they will buy into their leaders. If they want to be like that leader, if That's they true. Know that leader cares about them, if they know that leader is, the things that they're saying, they buy into it. They buy into you going forward. You could be the one that inspires them to want to go give their best and prepare. Because we've been doing this for a long time of struggling with, is there an actual deployment coming? Because that's what we felt in the 90s. It was like, well, tip of the spear. Yeah, right. And you want to be like the people that are in charge. You want to be like absolutely. Them. I want to have the life that you have. I want people to look at me the way that they look at you. And so what did you do to get to this point? So they buy into not just the environment or the threat, but they buy into the fact that they want to be like the people. They want to be a part of that team. They want to be a part of something special. And the people that don't want to be a part of those things they'll find their way somewhere else, right? And it's similar in sports. You get the teams that want to win a championship, and then the teams that are comfortable just making the playoffs, or the teams that are just comfortable collecting a good salary, or they're comfortable going off to college and playing college sports, but they're not really interested in trying to win a championship. It's very similarities in both of those.
Yeah, I agree, sir.
Okay. So now what do you have that's kind of, looming out in front of you? What are you excited about the future? You got boxes in the background, you're in a hotel, you're about to move into a house, but what are you the most excited about the next couple of years?
Sir, I think the job that I'm going into as a foreign area officer, the environment that we're kind of shifting towards in terms of our international politics and international relations, I think there's a huge job that needs to be done and a role to be played representing the military abroad in these countries that we have key interest in. I'm a Middle East, North Africa FAO specifically. And so I just came from Jordan, and obviously we know what's happening overseas right now in Iran. And I think there's a lot of, what's the best way to put this? I think it's important to have war fighters in that position that understand the cost of war and kind of what the tactics look like on the ground in order to set conditions properly for us to either avoid it or be prepared for it if it comes. And so I'm excited to be able to take, kind of like you were saying, sir, I will always be an infantryman, and I'm excited to bring that to the table and offer that to the team as a foreign area officer. I think, I spent some time in Lebanon, helping the U.S. government in our goal to disarm Hezbollah. And there was a lot of actual infantry experience that I was able to bring to that, talking to Lebanese infantry battalion and brigade commanders, hearing about what their challenges are, seeing where the U.S. could help, offering that help in the correct way. And so I'm excited to be able to take, the 12 years I've had in the Army, all this infantry experience, and hopefully apply it in a way that hopefully prevents conflict, in the Middle East and North Africa specifically. But if conflict is to come, to prepare us in a way that is appropriate so that we are ready to execute, if the time comes.
I love that. It seems like you just answered the second part was like, what are some of the dreams that you have of accomplishing, things that you hope to accomplish over the next few years? And you've already started to dabble into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is something that's floating around in the back of your head that you do spend a lot of time thinking about?
One of them is this whole notion of, I used to pride myself in being a field, quote unquote, field leader, and I love being on staff, but I used to think oh, that's my strength. I'm a field leader, not a garrison leader or a staff leader. And I think I've been thinking about that a lot. And this is something that I really started to learn when I was with the Warrior Brigade, but there's no such thing as field leader and garrison leader. There's just leadership, and leaders have an obligation to be tactically competent and also trustworthy. And everything that you do in garrison, which may seem like it doesn't have relevance to your tactical competence, like HR metrics and your readiness metrics and this and that. All of that is you building trust with your commander that you can run your formation in a way that's nested with his intent, and that your formation is ready to deploy to go to war. And when I started thinking about things that way, I started to realize, oh, these things are not irrelevant to us going and fighting a war. Like this is half of the battle every day, building trust with our commander, our battalion building trust with brigade building trust with division, that the formation is ready so that we can execute the tactical side of the mission, And so I know that those are terms that get tossed around a lot, kind of at the company level and below. And I hear a lot of people say like, oh, well, I'm a tactical side guy, like not a garrison side guy.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to dispel that notion. Like, hey, everyone has an obligation to be tactically competent. And then just know everything you're doing in garrison is building or breaking trust. And so keeping that in mind, like if you want to be the DO or the tip of the spear for an operation, the way to get there is through every day making sure that your HR metrics are good, your admin is good, your unit is ready, and like these things that seem mundane, but they're building trust with your commander that you are the right guy to be called upon to be the DO, And it took me a long time to learn that lesson, and so I'm hoping to kind of throw that out there so that anyone who's out there who is identifying kind of more of a field guy than a garrison guy understands that you're selling yourself short, and you're going to miss out on opportunities to really lead if you disregard kind of half of what your role as a leader is.
Yeah, I think that part is important, because as become a senior leader and like battalion commander, brigade commander, sergeant major, those folks that are out there, how many people you're going to be able to bring to the fight is very important.
Exactly.
Like you might have 50 that are really solid, that are well trained, but this other company can bring 120, and they don't even have to be nearly as good. But 120 people are gonna do a lot better in this situation. You're going to bring a lot more people. They're deployable. A lot less people that are on profile that are out there. Those things matter. What advice do you have, or what requests do you have of senior leaders like me? What do people your age, you're a major, you're out there, what do you want from senior leaders, a little bit more of?
I think at every echelon, this is something I've learned that I want more of. Is it's kind of exactly like what I was saying just now. I think at every echelon, there's so much context for decision making and things that are happening around you that at your level, that you kind of assume that people below So for JPMRC, maybe, sir, it's like you are having conversations with really senior leaders about what their vision for and intent is for JPMRC to accomplish for the Indo-Pacific arena. And some of those, when you hear them from the senior leaders, sound kind of self-explanatory. You're like, oh, okay, sir, like Roger, I understand that that's JPMRC's mission. But I know from, maybe for me, even as Major Kim in JPMRC, maybe even though it is self-explanatory, if I haven't heard it, it's not clicking with me or registering that, oh, we're nested with this purpose. And once you say it and you say, hey, I just had this conversation with this senior leader, and he was just making sure that I understood this is X, Y, and Z purpose for JPMRC. And you kind of just told that anecdote to, Major Kim. I really think that I would be like, oh yeah, even though that's obvious, now that you've said it out loud, I really do understand that a little bit better, and, have a little bit more focus for what our intent is. I just think that a lot of leaders, we take for granted the context that we have, and we don't communicate that low in a way that well to the lower echelons in a way that helps provide them that context that maybe is obvious, but until it's said, no, you're not really thinking about it, if that makes sense, sir.
It does. It does, and it's not just providing context in, say, a command and staff or in a briefing or on a PowerPoint slide. I think it's providing context at the right moments, the moments where it will click in people's head, like the training that you're doing right now in the Philippines. This is what we talk about when we say deterrence. This is what we mean by forward in the region. This is what we mean. What you are doing right now, this is what we mean by building readiness, because you are getting better with your tools. You're getting better as a fighting formation. You're learning how to use the new equipment. You're building partnerships with your allies, the Philippine army that's here, the Japanese army that's here with us. Like, you can see them. Like, this is the moment to talk about it. Maybe not back at the barracks or not back at Schofield Barracks, because now all I'm thinking about is, what time am I going to the gym? You know, it's hard. You gotta tell the right story at the right moment. And I see these exercises that we do and the rehearsals that our folks are doing. The time to tell them about these things is while they're doing it. The time to give an AAR comment is at the precise moment where they either are about to screw something up or they're about to miss an opportunity. This is the time to now talk to them and say, hey, what's going through your mind right now? I'm thinking about doing this. I'm thinking about, establishing a hasty defense around here. Well, think about the opportunity. If you continue to move throughout the night, you could seize another kilometer or 2 kilometers and get to a better piece of terrain. And then you need less time to prepare for the defense. And they're like, I didn't think about it like that. So that was an opportunity that was about to be missed. And if you don't talk about it, now we bring it up in the AAR. Well, at the AAR, everybody's tired. Everybody's like, all I'm thinking about is going home, or I'm thinking about the next thing. The moment to tell me that would have been the night where I was trying to decide, sit here, go into patrol base, get a good night's sleep, or move through the night and get to a better piece of terrain, going forward. So I think that's a huge thing to ask of senior leaders. What else are you hoping to get from senior leaders?
I think one thing that I did get a lot, and I hope to continue to get, is grace. Well, room to make mistakes, and then grace after the mistakes are made. Because I do think the biggest moments of learning, kind of like we've talked about, sir, have been after some of the biggest mistakes that I've made. And if I didn't have leaders that showed me some grace and gave me another opportunity, I wouldn't have been able to actually codify those lessons, And I think it can be hard because emotions are inherently a part of leadership. And I think sometimes when bad things happen, it's easy to let your emotions take a hold of, the way that you respond. But just realizing that the power of grace gives people, an opportunity to rebuild and learn from, big mistakes. I think that would be something that I would continue to ask leaders that I have, at least, but leaders across formation too, to just keep that in mind.
Yeah. For those that are listening, something I've reflected on, or I can now say, because I've been in the Army, is that although we don't always seem to give everybody grace in the moment, at the precise moment that we screw something up, everybody's willing to give somebody another chance. And everybody wants to give somebody an opportunity to maybe change the direction of their career or their path. And, and it's so easy to look back and just be bitter, or to look back and say, hey, I didn't get this opportunity earlier in my career, so therefore it's over. That's not the case. There are so many leaders out there that are willing to say to people, hey, if this is what you want, all you have to do is do X, Y, and Z. Hey, I want another shot at this. Hey, I want to go to another unit, and I want another opportunity for a leadership opportunity to go out there. I don't see a lot of people getting told they can't go back to the line.
It's true.
And they can't go on another rotation. Hey, I'd love to go to the Philippines. I'd love to go over to the Malaysia and Indonesia and be on staff and help build this team and help build, an exercise that everybody wants to be a part of. That thing that
That's
you
true.
said earlier, that I want to create this next training exercise so that soldiers can walk away from it feeling like $1 million. I
Exactly.
didn't do a great job of it last time or a couple years ago, but I want another shot. People would be like, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
They're looking for people that are fired up, that want to be given another shot.
Yeah, I will say in my, as I look back and remember 10 times out of 10, when a soldier came up and said, "Hey, I know I screwed up. Can you give me another chance? Like, I'm motivated to try to do better." Every time I feel like we're giving them another chance. In fact, I had a guy, Ranger Tab, I think he got his tab as a specialist, but it was after 7 tries at EIB as an E6 or E7, he got it. And it wasn't like, oh, look at you, man. It took you 7 tries. It was like, dude, congrats. Like, this is what a story of resilience and overcoming challenges, and what an example you are for all these younger soldiers to never give up.
When I was a private, our platoon sergeant, Sergeant Silverthorne, was Sergeant First Class, and he had failed EIB 7 times, and all 7 times was hand grenades, because you had to throw the hand grenade, and it had to go in the pit, and if it hit the side of the pit, it would roll off. If you should, and he's like 7 times. He's like, he was our Sergeant First Class Ranger Battalion platoon sergeant. And he got it, I think, his 8th time. And when we were going through it with him, he was out there leading the way for our platoon when I was going through as a private.
Yeah, and those are celebrated as successes of resilience. Not really belittled or anything. I agree with you, sir. I think we do love to give people chances and celebrate when they succeed over time.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate those. And, at this point, we're well deep into, the only people listening right now are the true believers that are listening, that are captivated by the things that we're talking about right now.
I am thankful that you gave me the time and the platform to just kind of talk about some experiences, sir.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, and I learn more from these than anybody does, because I get to listen to everything. I get to ask all the questions. I get to, kind of prime you with, these are the things I want to hear about going forward. Are there any things that you want me to, because I'm going to do a bunch of episodes coming up here soon. Are there other things that you want me to kind of put into future episodes and go out and get those kind of people?
If I could, there's 2, they're now captains, both in company command. They were gimlets once upon a time, but they're huge fans of the podcast. And I think they both separately have really awesome experiences that could be relatable to kind of the senior lieutenant, junior captain population. Brittany Butler, you might even know them. So
I do.
Yeah. Captain Brittany Butler, and then her husband, Nate. Nate's about to go take command at 275.
Mm-hmm.
And Brittany is coming up on a year of command, and I think she's slated to have like 19 months of command in the same company. So she has a lot of reflections from her time in command. And so absolutely, I would love to hear their stories and the kind of their perspectives. And I know, they're huge fans of the podcaster, so I know they would love to come on here. But yeah, I think what's so awesome about this podcast is every person is different and every story goes in a different direction. And so you can click on any random podcast, it's going to be something different. Who knows where the direction is going to go? And you get to hear everybody's perspectives on things and stories. And so I have nothing to ask you, sir. Honestly, it's just keep having conversations, and it's been awesome to learn from all of them. I have a couple favorites that I go back to a couple times, but Sean, like Sergeant Major Curry's, is just so good. I love listening to his.
Yeah. And I go back and listen to them for the reasons of what were the things that person told me. And in some cases, it's hard in the moment to take in everything that the person is telling me. So I go back and listen to it, and then I remind myself of like what they had told me to do, what they had said to do, what they had said to practice, and I put it to use. Yeah. The thing I want to end with is right where we kind of started, which was, we said we were going to talk about winning cultures, creating teams. What does it mean to be a great teammate? I'm going to have Ryan and several of the girls from her West Point volleyball team here next week, and we're going to talk about what does it take to be, the greatest teammate? What does it take to be a part of a winning team? and not just from a sports side of it, but also from an Army side of it. I think the biggest commonality is people like you, people like Don Castello will reach out to me and say, these are the people that, you need to hear about. You need to talk to Nate and Brittany. We want to hear what they have to say.
Yeah.
Not just what they want to say, but the way that they make us feel with the things that they're trying to communicate. And,
Exactly.
and I want to be like those people. I want people to look at me the way that they look at them.
Yep.
And that is what we're doing here by sharing these stories is bringing together the world, a bunch of the world's greatest teammates, and trying to figure out what are the commonalities between all of them.
Yeah, definitely, sir.
Well, thanks again, buddy, for doing this with me today. Thanks for carving out so much time, and I look forward to hearing some of the feedback from people with the things that they had to say about you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, sir, and hopefully I get to see you again soon in Hawaii. I really believe in what you're doing here, sir. It's cool hearing just everybody's stories. I always say the best thing about the Army is the people, and I'm kind of away from your traditional formations now because I'm working in embassies. So just listening to all these officers, NCOs telling their stories, it's really awesome, and kind of helps me stay grounded and feel like I'm still part of those formations and stuff, sir. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
All right, brother. Thank you for this. Have a great rest of your day.
You too, sir. Stay safe out there with the floods.
Yeah, we'll talk soon, okay?
Okay, sir. Sounds good.
All right, bye. Thanks for listening today. I hope we sparked some thoughts about the people that have inspired you to be who you are today. I hope you share some of your thoughts, and better yet, demonstrate them for the people in your life. Our pursuit is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories stacked on top of each other, building like compound interest. Keep stacking these positive habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Please share your comments at the links in the show notes and DM us at Teach Me to Fish podcast on Instagram or Facebook. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Times don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight.